So in the last video, we talked about some very tiny, powerful mirrorless cameras that aren't going to break the bank in the Sony NEX3 and NEX5. But not everyone's into the mirrorless thing, despite all of your major companies being in there at this point, apart from Pentax. But I mean, can we call Pentax a major company? I don't even know. What's going on, Pentax? Before we get started, I just want to say a thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Fulaim. All the audio you're going to be hearing in this video is from their X6 wireless microphone kit, but more about that in just a little bit. Now, the camera I want to talk about today is not the tiniest DSLR of them all. I think that goes to its predecessor, but today we're talking about the Canon 200D. I don't know if this is focusing because I'm using the GH5 again with autofocus. I mean, I don't know why I keep trying. It's a GH5. Anyway. Canon 200D. Now again, for comparison's sake, here we are against the NEX5, tiny, 200D. Obviously much larger because it's a DSLR, you know, much thicker body and such. But again, as we said about the 350D, because of the way a DSLR is built, because of what's got to be inside of it, they're naturally going to be bigger. And this one has obviously the OVF on the top, so it has that hump. But yeah, it's still a pretty small camera. And if we compare it to, if we compare it to one of the smallest full-frame DSLRs, the Canon 6D, you can see there is quite the difference. And on paper, there's not a lot between these two, really. All right, so like we did with the NEX3 and the NEX5, we're going to have a quick look around the 200D, talk about some of its features and some of its specs. I'm not going to get too deep into the numbers because, frankly, I'm more bothered about the output of the camera, what the pictures look like. The numbers are fairly meaningless to me, but I do want to talk a little bit about the video specs in this camera because it does have fairly respectable video specs. And I had a message recently and a little bit of a back and forth from Dr. Mo, who was asking about using a Canon 200D for a little bit of video work for social media and such. So let's have a look what this thing can do. The Canon 200D came around in July of 2017 alongside the full-frame Canon 6D Mark II. The 200D features a 24.2 megapixel APS-C size sensor, and it weighs in at just 453 grams, including the battery and memory card. It will shoot full HD 1080p movies up to 60 frames a second. The Canon 200D uses Canon's EF mount, and that gives you access to a massive array of fantastic glass from Canon. Around the back of the camera, we've got all of the usual controls you would expect to see, the menu buttons, the quick menu button, adjusters for zooming in, etc, etc. We've also got a fully articulated 3.2-inch touchscreen, which is a very nice feature. On the top of the camera, we've got the hot shoe, we've got the mode dial, we've got the on-off switch, which also has an extra switch over to video mode. We have buttons for ISO and display functions. We also have a single scroll wheel and the shutter button, as well as the wireless button over on the left side. Over on one side of the camera, we have a mini HDMI and a mini USB ports. And on the other side, we have a microphone in and a shutter release port. Both the SD card and the battery live in this small door over on the bottom of the camera. Right then, now with all that nonsense out of the way, let's have a look at some images. A big thank you to today's sponsor, Fulaim. All of the audio you've heard in this video, including these voiceovers, was captured using the Fulaim X6 wireless microphone. The kit comes in this very nice hard case and contains 4 transmitters, a receiver, a USB-A to 5 USB-C splitter cable for charging, a 3.5mm to 3.5mm cable for plugging into your camera or your recording device, 4 dead cats, one for each of the transmitters, and connectors for both iPhone and Android. A quick look around the transmitter shows that we have a power on button and a set button on one side, a 3.5mm jack input on the top and the microphone, and a USB-C on the opposite side for charging. Around the back we have this springy clip and also a magnet so that you can attach it in various different ways. The transmitter is a very similar story. We have the power button and the volume button on the one side. We have the USB-C and the 3.5mm port on the opposite side, and that springy clip on the back to allow you to connect it to either clothing or to the hot shoe of your camera. The display on the receiver shows information for all 4 transmitters, as well as information regarding volume, battery life, low cut filters, and the mode that you're using the microphones in. If you look back around the side to the power button on the receiver, it also doubles as the on-off switch for the low cut filter. If you look back to the transmitter, the set button on the side also enables the 2 different levels of noise reduction. For my personal use, I don't use the noise reduction, I'd rather apply that in post, but I do use the low cut filter. Now, like the X5 microphone before it, the X6 will allow you to record to a safety channel, which means that one channel will record at normal volume, and then the second channel will record at 6 decibels quieter, just in case you get any of those instances where your audio may clip on the main channel. You always have that safety backup. A link for the X6 will be down in the description. Now back to the video. All right, so thinking about the Canon 200D as a photo camera, I really can't fault it. Size is pretty much perfect. It's got some nice features. It's got good resolution at 24 megapixels. It's got enough dynamic range if you know how to expose properly, or if you're prepared to use bracketing and such as that. It's got some nice features, you know, the touch to focus and touch to shoot with the screen. Very nice for those awkward angles and stuff like that. It's just a really nice camera. And if I was to compare it to any other camera that I've used, I would say it's probably about on par with something like the Sony a6000. When comparing the 200D to the 60 that I mentioned earlier, they're kind of on par almost on paper, but in practice it's not exactly the case. You've got more resolution in the Canon 200D. You've got about the same dynamic range, usable dynamic range, but the 60 does have a little bit of an edge when it comes to high ISO performance, but you're only talking maybe a stop. If we're being realistic, maybe stop and a half at best. But you're not buying a camera like the Canon 200D to shoot in the dark. Now, in terms of video, it's good, but it's showing its age. Output is 1080p. It will go up to 60 frames a second, which is nice. That'll allow you to slow it down and get 40% slow-mo, which is great. But it's 1080p. No log profiles or any of that sort of stuff to sort of expand the dynamic range and all that kind of stuff. No image stabilization, so obviously you're relying on stabilized lenses or using a tripod or a gimbal to make sure that your shots look nice and smooth. So another downside for this camera, and I'm talking UK specifically here because I don't know what the prices look like anywhere else, but it's held its price really well here. Even on the used market, you regularly see these at around the £300 mark, which to me, I mean, it's a great camera, but you can get a Sony a7 for about the same price, as an example. So you've really got to decide on, does this camera have the features that you want, and is it worth that money? Because there are other cameras out there that will, from a photo output point of view, will probably exceed what this is capable of, but from a features point of view, less so. But again, it might not be the same across the board. You know, in other countries it might be very cheap, but here, not so much. Alright, so that pretty much covers it for the Canon 200D. I'd love to know in the comments if you're still a 200D or just a DSLR user in general. Let me know in the comments and let me know why. Also, how was the audio in this episode? I'm using that Fulaim X6 thing. I've been using it for work, for doing like interviews, talking head type stuff. It's worked perfectly fine. I've had absolutely no issues with it whatsoever, so let me know in the comments. If this sounded nice, that probably didn't sound nice, I'll stop. Also, finally, how was the autofocus in this? I've been watching some videos recently about trying to get this bloody GH5 to autofocus in some sort of respectable way. I don't know if it's worked or not, but I'll keep trying. I like the camera. It's just a shame that's got the worst autofocus system that's ever been invented. Cheers, Panasonic.